Welcome to the BiCurean podcast, where we explore and embrace the seeming contradictions of life. What actually is BiCurean, you ask?
Well, you may not necessarily have a mental concept of BiCurean, partially maybe because it's a made-up word. You embody it. What's happening right now in terms of the divisions between us is a focus on that which is different.
And lack of understanding and empathy for people's beliefs is no longer an excuse.
And it is in the differences we carry in ourselves that we find the BiCurean moment.
When you really dig into something, you're going to see some depth to it. It's not just a race thing. It's not just a conservation thing.
It's letting go of the or to make room for the and. We embrace all of you. Welcome to the BiCurean.
Welcome to the BiCurean podcast. I am Aisela.
And I am Eric.
And this week we are really excited to have a special guest on our show. And his name is Steve Cox. And he's going to talk a little bit about why the parties are the problem and some other things. And we're hoping that you will introduce yourself and tell our guests a little bit about you.
Hi, I'm Steve Cox, as you said. I'm an independent candidate for Congress here in Southern California. I'm kind of a perpetual candidate, if you will, because it's a bit of a climb to get everybody aware and all that stuff when you don't have a party behind you. But I legitimately had an epiphany quite a few years ago about this, about the parties and more or less what if they don't want to do the things they say they want to do. What if that doesn't serve their interests type of thing? And I started putting that to the test. And over the course of time, I think I figured out that that's actually true and at least largely true. And so I decided I had to do something about it. So, that's where I'm at and that's where I'm coming from.
So I admit I am rather frustrated with being a left-leaning liberal. I'm very frustrated with my own party right now in the Democrats, which is ironic that I would even say that, right? Because I don't consider them my party, but they kind of have to be, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to play ball. But I love the idea of independent candidates and things like that. What has been your experience in the conversations you've had?
I got to tell you, like I said, it's an uphill climb because there's a lot of things that have been sort of pushed into people's way of thinking about this, the wasted vote and this sort of stuff. Like, a lot of people believe that they have to or must choose between these two parties. But as I've gone around and I've been canvassing since I first started running in late 2017, I canvass neighborhoods and whatever, and I knock on doors, and I hate it because honestly, you won't know it because of what I'm doing here, but I'm an introvert naturally. So I hate knocking on doors every single time. I'm like, I don't want to do it, but I always knock. I always step past that discomfort, and I knock, and almost 100% of the time, this is how it goes. I knock, I go, knock, knock. I don't actually say that, by the way. I'm just kidding.
Thanks for the clarification.
I knock, they answer the door. I'm usually wearing a suit because some of the things I believe are true are so far outside of the Overton window that you have to dress nice or people will think you're crazy. So I wear a suit, I knock on the door, they answer the door, I say, hi, I'm Steve Cox. I'm running for Congress here, and I shake their hand. And they always do this. They fold their arms in front of themselves, and they just go like, which party? Like this. And I'm like, I'm an independent. And almost 100% of the time, they're like, oh, okay.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what party they are. Like, it really doesn't matter. And then, a lot of times they just want to know that you're not the enemy. I think that's most of it. But, like, believe it or not, and this surprised me as I was going on, as I started this process, believe it or not, Republicans, in my experience, are less partisan than Democrats are.
I absolutely believe that.
Yeah, but it was a surprise to me because I always thought of Democrats as being, priding themselves on being open-minded and things like that. But geez.
Well, and so it's interesting. I come from a really conservative background. And I am now in a very liberal life. And so I have a lot of like really close friends and family who are really quite conservative, and we've stayed close. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was this moment when, because doing the podcast, what I wanted was to create something that kind of bridge, like my life has to be a bridge. And that's part of why this is such a passion for me. And one of my really close friends who's still quite conservative Christian, and he's a dad, and he wrote us and he said, I'm playing this podcast for my kids because I want them to know all social justice warriors aren't full of hate. And he really sees us as an ally, right? Like, so that we've achieved that, which is really awesome. But that was a moment for me to be really clear that this idea that the left has of the, hateful conservative is completely mirrored by the idea that the right has of the hateful social justice warrior. Yeah. And I 100% know where it comes from. I absolutely know exactly why they have that view. And so that's a really painful thing to recognize, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So
I got to admit, I assume you guys both watched my campaign videos, like 5-minute videos.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it.
Yep.
I really love it.
Thank you. That was all from my heart. It's really what I believe. But also, I really believe that in that video, we talk a lot about the divisions that are sort of foisted upon us by the media and whatever. And I got to say, I really think that that's a big driver of this thing, I'm a huge George Carlin fan. I mentioned this to you on the Twitter talking, and he does this whole bit talking about how, they don't care about you. Like it's a big club and you ain't in it. He talks about the owners of this country and all this stuff. And that's really, I think, essentially what it is there are moneyed interests that control our government through our representatives, what are supposed to be our representatives, and they're not our representatives. And those moneyed interests also happen to control most of the media and all this stuff. So it's not like, once you start breaking it down, it's not really even that crazy to understand. It's not even weird. It makes sense.
Absolutely.
That people end up this way,
So I flipped through your website and we'll post a link to it in our show notes. But for the benefit of our listeners in the show, maybe you can just give us the elevator pitch version of kind of where you're coming from and what your stances are on some of the key points.
Sure. I do call myself a Bernie-crat. But I'm a little bit left of him, to be honest, in some stuff, and I'm right of him on other stuff. I try to avoid labels for the most part because they mean different things to different people. And if I say I'm a progressive, then certain progressives are going to think that means one thing, but I'm not that thing. But truth is I'm a libertarian sometimes. I'm a conservative sometimes. I'm a liberal sometimes. I'm a lefty sometimes. But it's always based off of the evidence that I can dig up, the numbers, the facts, the data, and ultimately the center goal of it, the root goal of what I'm trying to bring across is a true liberty for the people, where they can live their lives as they see fit without being subjugated by big business or government, where government does its job to take care of theft and other sort of crimes against people, and business does its job, and pays its employees well, and all this sort of stuff. And so, like I said, I'm a bit of a Bernie-crat, but the bottom line is I think I think there are right and wrong answers. This isn't even a matter of opinion anymore. I don't think. Like, I've looked into this enough. Healthcare, I think, is going to be better done as a single payer system, not for profit. I think that's the right way to do it. I think that's the way to make it happen. I think that economics bear that out in terms of like economic theory. I also, from a moral standpoint, I want to get us out of these wars, and I'm going to be against any war anybody brings up unless it's in direct defense of our own nation. When I'm in office, we got to get something going to fight climate change, something big, a lot bigger than what anybody's even actually promoted or talked about so far. Nobody's come close to actually addressing it yet. So on all these things, I sort of land on the left, and everybody, assumes I'm a lefty, and I am in some ways, I guess, but I'm also not for gun bans or anything like that. I'm for universal background checks, things like that, but I'm not for banning things, taking things away from, regular people that own them that aren't really a problem for anybody else, things like that. So, on that way, I end up on the right. And sometimes when I'm talking to a Republican, when I'm canvassing, they'll ask me, they'll be like, well, name one thing that you agree with me about. And I'll be like, I don't believe banning guns would actually help anything. They just kind of go, oh, okay. And then they want to, then they're like cool talking about universal health care. They're cool talking about the climate change, all this stuff. It's like, you just got to break in a little bit and let them know that you're not going to try and take away everything that they hold dear,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We did an episode called The Perception Gap on a study that was released that was really, really intriguing around the left and the right here in this country, and specifically the Democrat and Republican labels. Did you see that when it came through, or I don't know?
I didn't. I've listened to your foxes and
hedgehogs.
Hedgehogs. I listened to that one and the one that came after, but that's all I've had a chance to listen to so far. But I loved it.
I just don't know if you, and I'll send you because you'll find it to be very interesting as well, I'm sure. And it was put out by a group called More in Common. That's an international group that's trying to get people to notice that we actually have more in common than different.
Yes.
But the really interesting thing about it was they asked Democrats, what do you think Republicans would say about a good immigration system?
The border, fixing the border.
Yeah. And letting people in. And the Democrats were like, they're like 30% of them would be in favor of fixing the system. And then they
versus 70% wanting to build a wall.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the perception point there.
And then they asked the Republicans the same question, like, how would you feel about, vetted immigration, kind of stuff? And the Republicans were like 60% in favor. And then similarly, they asked the Republicans, what do you think Democrats feel about,
gun control, for example?
Allowing people to have their rights with some reasonable protections. And the Republicans, the same thing. They're like, 30% of them are in favor of it. And then they asked the Democrats, and the Democrats are more like our actual difference is not as different as our perception of our difference, which really speaks to your point about the media.
I got to tell you, from my perspective, I really truly believe that all people are essentially the same. We have about 3 traits that all of us share, with very few exceptions, like sociopaths, whatever. But, for the overall thing, we all share traits where we basically want to be able to have a place of relative safety to raise our families, and to live, in relative comfort. We want to feel like we can be who we are and be accepted for who we are by our community. And we want to be able to contribute to our community. I think those 3 things are universal things that go across any sort of lines. And I think that my belief is that if we start at what is the same about us, if we start at the point that everything is the same, that we're all human beings, and human beings are these things, that's what human beings are, then it makes it a lot easier to accept and even celebrate our differences, which are also very important. Our cultural differences, our sexual orientations, our any number of differences that we have, those seem to not matter as much if you start from the point of view that we are all essentially the same.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I would also say that a lot of what you said, where your policies lie, would fly quite high in our state where we're in, which is Colorado. We're fully
fan, by the way.
What's that?
I'm a Broncos fan.
Oh,
it's a rough year, but
it has been a rough year. I am a diehard Broncos fan as well. It has not been easy.
No.
But Well, and that's sort of the thing. Like, you know, we have an identity out here, and we are firmly a blue state at this point. But out here,
Yeah.
you're gonna find more gun-toting Democrats than probably anywhere, maybe, but the Northeast, like New England area. They do that a
Yeah.
lot there too.
Well, I mean,
And-
it's somewhat wildernessy, right? You got outside, once you get outside of Colorado Springs, Denver, whatever, you get out of, you know, you get wilderness, you're going to have a gun at some point. Like, there's stuff out there.
Yeah, well, and hunting's a part of the culture here, and there's a certain
Yeah.
amount of, as you mentioned, kind of a libertarian view of, I'm
Yeah.
not hurting nobody, let me own my guns. And
And it's really hard to convince people, I think, that taking away their gun is going to help prevent a shooting.
ironically, in spite of the fact that we have both Columbine and the Aurora shooting as
Right.
local news, so it
Yeah.
has you know, I feel like there was a shooting the day that we were recording this.
Yeah, and here in California.
Yeah, and you know, it's just, oh, how many this time? How old was he? Where was it?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you know, in the Colorado news, we were a part of the very, you know, the big ones, Columbine.
Two of the biggest, yeah.
Yeah, it
Which
set
is
the
awful,
standard.
obviously.
Yeah, it's not great. But so in Denver proper, they have passed a lot firmer gun laws and things like that. But in general, the state hasn't. And you know, I feel like we're in an interesting experiment out here.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I could tell you, because this is one of my favorite subjects because it flies in the face of everything we're told. But I look at the data, and again, I'm a nerd. I'm a total geek. I dive into data. I want to see the numbers. I want to see what everything says. And, you know, so we have this Bloomberg anti-gun lobby on one side, which is, you know, billionaire Bloomberg, and he wants to ban everything or whatever. I don't know. But, you know, I think they're well-intentioned. But then you have the NRA on the other side. I'm not so sure about their well-intentioned. You know, but you know, both of those, especially the NRA, it's a good analogy for the parties in a way, because if you ever notice after a mass shooting, what will happen is the NRA will somehow rile up the anti-gun crowd, you know, by putting out a press release like they did after Sandy Hook, stuff like that, which, you know, a press release basically saying, oh, it wasn't our fault. And it's like, nobody was saying it was your fault, you know, like, shut up. Like, nobody wants to hear from the NRA after 20 kids were just murdered in school, right? Like, it's just not a smart way of looking at it. But then that was one of the things that brought me to this realization was I realized that when they riled everybody up, when the NRA riled everybody up, it riled up the anti-gun crowd. And when it riled up the anti-gun crowd, money came into the NRA.
Yeah.
Because the anti-gun crowd starts threatening gun rights. And then, you know, that's good for the NRA. And that's when I started going, oh, I get it. I understand. I get what they're doing. You know, this is money. And the parties do the same thing. But where I'm going with this is that when you start from a position of, you know, 400 million guns at this point in this country, minimum, I don't think that there's a way to ban that and make it just go away. Like, I don't think that's a possibility at this point. Like, that Pandora's box is open. But we do have a solution. We really, really do have a solution. It's the same solution it's always been. And that's the frustrating part of this. Socioeconomic equality.
Mm-hmm.
That's what stops everything. Like, all the crime, all the violent crime, the property crime, you know, universal health care, so we could actually help people with their mental health problems too, because that's also relevant in this discussion, and on and on and on. It's socioeconomic equality. We have the worst socioeconomic equality by far in the Western world, among OECD nations. We also have the highest rate of gun deaths. I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
I don't think it has to do with the guns.
Nope.
Not that much, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, guns are one issue, and
Sure.
we could talk about that all night.
Yeah.
I don't
really
know
could,
if this is something you'd consider to be political suicide, but it's tough to discuss anything in politics right now without bringing up our current situation with impeachment hearings and all of that. I'm more to the point, and this is a subject that we covered on a last show. It's a very partisan process by design. What are your thoughts on that? Because to be honest, I fear we have a tyrant in power, this is outside of my political leanings either way, the things he does makes me worried that he doesn't have the country's best interests in heart. And we live in a world where I think we fundamentally assume if somebody gets elected to office, they do. And I don't know what to do when that doesn't feel true.
Well, I feel like that assumption is the first part of the problem.
I agree now.
They get into office because they seek power, and I think that anybody who seeks power, you should automatically not trust them. It's the opposite of what you're talking about. Anybody who seeks power in any form should their trust in them should be very, very difficult to achieve and very, very easy to lose, in my opinion, because they're putting themselves in a position where they can do a lot of damage if they're if they decide they want to. And that goes for clergy, that goes for police officers, that goes for anybody who seeks out any sort of a position of power like that. So that's number one. God, everybody always, I end up getting accused of being a Trump supporter. I'm not a Trump supporter. I think the guy's an idiot, and I have no love for him at all. It's just that I don't think that the other side of it, I think that up till now, they've been better at hiding their motives than this guy is. I think that's really the bigger issue for me. I think that it's mostly that he's just kind of doesn't care about, like he's now talking about, we need to guard the oil fields in Syria. And I'm like, that's why we've been in all these wars from the beginning, is for oil fields, but you never hear a president say it, right? Now he's saying it.
He pulls the troops out and then admits why we're putting some back in.
Right, exactly. Because we need the oil. And that was the whole point in any of those wars, right? That's the whole idea. It's oil, it's banking, and it's natural gas, and it's defense contractors. That's what it is.
I think that, because one of the things I appreciated about our exchange on Twitter that led me to talk to Eric about asking you to be on the show was that I appreciate that you challenged some of my assumptions. And I really thought a lot about some of the stuff that you brought up, because I was like, oh, I can see what you're saying. And a lot of my conservative friends are not Trump supporters. And despite often they're very much like Republican down the line kind of voters. And we meet there on the indecency and the ways in which he projects some of these harmful behaviors, because the reality is that a president is an example or a role model, and if the president does it, there for a lot of people there are a lot of people that will feel a sense of permission when they see a person in a position of power doing something. And that is a lot of it. Like my friends who were against him in the primary because they're Republicans and who were fighting against him being elected, they were like, this is not about parties. This is not about politics. This is about decency. This is about the way that we treat each other in this country. We don't want someone who is essentially a bully and doesn't have a problem being a bully publicly and in some ways creating a mandate for people. And I think for me, I was like, I think that's the place where I really land. That's one of the major challenges for me is I actually agree with you that I'm actually watching this comedy show and they're talking about, who's in the bad place. And they're like, all presidents except for Lincoln, And I'm like, probably. And because I think that's the thing. I really
love Thomas Jefferson as a thinker, but he owned slaves.
Right.
Like, you're not going to really get past that.
Exactly. And I think that what they were talking about when it came to decency, I'm like, no, that's really true. And it has done some things in how people feel comfortable behaving and expressing themselves that I don't think are particularly good for us as a country. And the nepotism is also concerning to me. Like we're not a monarchy, and therefore the family members of our president,
or their personal attorneys,
are not supposed to be ambassadors. Like those kinds of things are against the spirit of how our government is supposed to work, and that's concerning.
Can I do it? Can I throw just a little bit of a devil's advocate at you?
Absolutely,
please do.
What if? And I don't even know that this is true, so whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But what if the reason why he's doing the nepotism thing is because he doesn't know who he can actually trust in Washington or anybody like that? What if it's actually just because he doesn't know who's going to actually back him and who's going to leak on him or do anything else like that?
I actually think it's because he reminds me of a small businessman. Like my dad has a business and he hired his sister and his wife and you know, and I actually feel like when I look at it, I think that's his motivation. I think there's a trust thing, and I think it's just that he comes from the business world, and that's really common in a family business.
Like they could all make more money not in the government, right? Like,
but so I understand that may not have nefarious things behind it, and that doesn't matter actually because it's not.
It doesn't.
It's not how we do our government. Like it's actually why theoretically we said no more England, and to me that's something that is important when I actually step back and think about it. Like our purpose, and in some ways it's what you're talking about. Our purpose, it should be evidence based. If we're going to have someone do a job, they need to demonstrate the quality and the skill necessary to do it. So and then this other stuff, I'm like, no, I guess I probably agree with you. All our presidents have been corrupt, and I don't like that.
No. I mean, that's the worst part, right? Like, that's the part that just really gets me is, you know, because beyond Trump, like Trump is this, you know, lightning rod, right? Everybody hates him or they love him. And, you know, I hate him. I'm one of those people, but I don't hate him enough to ignore anything else around him or to, you know, like, this is going to sound funny, but if you put the CIA next to the devil himself and they were on opposite sides of an issue, I would have to hear the devil out, right? Like, that's more or less where I come from on stuff like that. So, you know, when the CIA is coming out against this guy, part of me is like, well, okay, you know, but you know, these are the same people that lied us into Iraq, lied us into Vietnam, you know, all kinds of other atrocities, experiments against our own people in this country, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm kind of like, well, you know, that's not really a trustworthy source to me. Like I wouldn't go around extolling the virtues of the CIA to anybody.
And isn't it funny? And this comes down to the partisan stuff that led you to where you're at right now. Right. But all of my liberal friends are just as likely to think the CIA is the worst thing ever if it wasn't for the fact that right now people in the CIA are anti-Trump. And that I think is core to fundamentally why I want to believe in and agree with where you're coming from an independent stance, because the partisan stuff, and that's the point of this show. We really do talk about like bringing people to center, looking at the other side of the argument. And like I said, Trump lost me. It was fairly recently, but the whole telling the 4 female senators with darker complexions to go home, and 3 of them were born here American citizens, and it's like, okay, that to me is owning slaves. Like that's just too much. So
it is.
So no, I do tend to agree with you,
and I like AOC a lot. I really do.
Yeah, I think she's wonderful.
More or less a badass.
And regardless, I just don't want to. He is influential, and I have a real problem with that being his influence. So I have specific complaints, but no, I agree with you. Like we can't be on the side of whatever's against what we're against. And
the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, people do it by default.
And
where do we go with that? Like, how do you even advance forward?
Well, and I think that's the part that's really upsetting is it is default. And I did it. Like that I got totally caught up in this tribal reflex thinking. And then I looked and I was like, wait a minute, you know, I learned how to be thoughtful around stuff with my family and my friends, but I bought into this default identity. And it not only does it not serve me, it doesn't actually build any kind of world that I want to be part of. And I get it.
No, and I actually... Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. I'm saying I get it because, like, honestly, what happened was I got really busy. Like, there was a lot going on. I had kids in school. I was working full time. Like, and I didn't have time to go and find all the details. I had to trust people.
Yeah, and you end up trusting untrustworthy media or whatever who's going to push a certain narrative anyway. I mean, Barack Obama broke my heart. I'm just going to tell you straight up, like, the guy broke my heart. I gave the guy $500 in 2008 on the promise of fixing healthcare, which meant to me at the time even, some sort of universal system, on the promise of getting us out of the wars, on the promise of expanding protections for federal whistleblowers, which was a big point for me because, again, very truth evidence-based guy here. Mm-hmm. And I live by the adage that which can be destroyed by the truth should be, right? And so there's a lot of things like that I had all the hope in the world for him. And he's the most amazing orator I think we've ever had in the office, at least since we've been able to record presidents and listen to them talk. But I mean, he broke my heart. He went against everything that he said he was going to do. He was against raiding. He was like going to give states rights for marijuana, for example. You guys are in Colorado.
Yeah.
But he ended up with more raids against state legal medical marijuana businesses in his first 4.5 years than had been performed in the previous 12 years to his presidency. He jailed more whistleblowers under the Espionage Act than all previous presidents combined. All of them combined.
Yeah.
Like, he broke my heart, man. And in a way, he's what pushed me here. This is why I ended up where I'm at.
So, sort of ironic, right? Because people might assume it was Trump or something.
Yeah, no, it was Obama.
Well, it's funny you bring up the healthcare thing, because I remember when that passed, and the next day I heard a news story that said that basically all of the stock prices for the insurance companies started shooting up immediately because people are now required to go to them or face penalties. And I'm like, that something feels wrong about this plan. That's not how it was supposed to work.
I can tell you exactly what's wrong with it. From an economics standpoint, we always talk about, you hear it in the media all the time, free market, free market, free market. A free market, in reality, the way that we use that term, we use it to mean laissez-faire capitalism, which is you keep government more or less out of the process. But in reality, a true free market is all of us, all the human beings in this country and in the world, essentially, but for this in this country, are the free market. We are the market. And in order for us to be a free market, we must be free to enter and leave the marketplace at will.
Yeah.
But if you're sick, if you've got leukemia, or you get in a car accident, anything like that, guess what? You're not free. You're a captive market. And so anything that's a captive market like that is going to be way too expensive. It's going to be easy to make a lot of profit off of people. And it's going to be, exactly what we have. 18%, we spend 18% of our GDP on healthcare. And the highest it is anywhere in the country in the OECD nations that all have universal healthcare is 12%. And the average is 9%. So we're double the average. And, it's all because it's just bad economics. And I knew that when that happened, when that went through that way, the only saving grace could have been if they had the public option, which was going to be a way for the public to buy into a government-run health insurance company or something like that. I don't know if it would be called a company, but that could have saved it, because you would have potentially introduced downward pressure on prices and things like that through competition if there's not a profit motive. But they killed that off, and the Democrats had 58 or 59 senators and the majority in the House, and they just couldn't make it happen.
Yeah. And I think that's the reality. Like, you're pointing out that stuff, and it makes total sense. And I think it takes coming from the independent mindset to actually be able to look at the flaws on both sides. And it's something that a lot of people I really respect, they stop short of that. They're not willing to actually look at, what did the Democrats do wrong? I feel ostracized when I point out that, during that time, the things I saw Nancy Pelosi doing did not make me feel real good.
Yeah.
Because we passed healthcare. That's what we needed to do.
Yeah.
Who is she working for? Is she working for you or even her constituents in San Francisco area, in the Bay Area?
Yeah.
Or is she working for big money lobbyists who are paying all this, putting the money into the party and everything else? The DNC and the RNC, the two conventions in 2016, both got like $1 million or more from Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
It's not hard to figure out. And if the same owner owns all the horses in a horse race, would you really bet on that race?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just don't know. Well, and one of the things that I was doing is kind of saying, okay, if I'm going to step back, I have to look at Trump differently. So there's these things that I do have issue with. That doesn't mean that his policies are all problematic. Like, once again, they can't, he actually legalized hemp in our country. Like, he's the one that made that happen. And that's going to be a great industry, potentially for the Midwest. There's a lot of possibility in that. Obama wouldn't do it.
Nope.
and so, I mean, we have to actually look and see what's happening and not, like you said, what we're being told is happening. And I think part of it is kind of what I was fighting with. Like, people are busy, and that's part of why we do the show, and we try to bring in some of the like underlying facts or ideas or different perspectives.
It's not even all political. Yeah. Sometimes it's just different ways of looking at common sense.
For sure. But like, this is, if you want to put on a tinfoil hat for a second.
Sure.
This works out. This is how this works, right? This is the system. I look at systems like an ecosystem or any sort of system. The way that I look at systems is, one of the definitions of a system is a self-contained thing, right? It operates on its own. Everything works, has its place. And usually they have pretty decent defenses against, problems coming along and everything else. If you look at this system, that's exactly what you're supposed to get, right? This is how it's set up. It's you can't expect a fish to climb a tree. This is how it works. You have big money interests that are paying off all these politicians and everything else to make sure that they get what they want. It's bribery. It's absolutely what it is. And that's what happens. That's just the end result. And then the only thing that, on the tinfoil hat end of things is that I don't understand yet is how much power the president really has to change foreign policy and things like that when you have these sort of cemented permanent government interests in these intelligence agencies and defense and everything else. Like, how much power does the president even really have? Maybe Barack Obama expanding the wars from 2 to 7, maybe that wasn't even his call.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, and that's the point. I mean, one of the things I'm clear on is until you've done a job, you actually don't know what the job entails. So that's a fair point. I would also say that one of the things that I observed during the 2016 election cycle is people were complaining about the two major party candidates. And my point was kind of, these are the candidates that our system has created. Yeah. These people have done what was necessary to get into this position. So we kind of have the candidates we deserve as long as we support the process it takes to get there. It's on us.
Think about that. Think about, like, in my opinion, those two candidates in 2016 shouldn't have made the top 10 million.
Right.
But they were the top two. They were the top two. How? How does that happen? In any functional democracy, that would not have happened.
Yeah. No, I agree. And like I said, one of the problems I have fundamentally with the party, the Democratic Party, was how things went down around Hillary. That, like, nothing was going her way, but they were pressuring so many people in the party to just switch and push, and it felt like they were going for a coronation. I don't dislike Hillary, and it's hard to have this conversation with anybody, in the party. Until
I do dislike Hillary a lot.
Yeah, but I mean, fundamentally, I don't think she's a horrible person. I did not want her to be president. That's the point. So from my point of view, the way that they kind of forced all of that was fundamentally the problem. And there was a lot of arguments, and I guess we'll never know whether Bernie could have won or not. The claims are he would have. from him and some other people. But
I think he would have.
And so, that's where I really see the partisan politics is not serving us, because the party is the more powerful
What
item.
happens if Bernie wins? What happens if Bernie wins? Like, think about that. If Bernie wins, he doesn't take any corporate money. He doesn't take any lobbyist money of any kind. What happens to that party? And I'm talking about the party up at the top. Like, regular people is a different thing altogether. But the near attendants and all these other people that like run these PACs and these other think tanks and other sort of ancillary things, that they're all part of this party, and they all play a role, and they all bring in millions and millions of dollars from all these special interest groups and everything else. So if you really analyze it, what would happen if Bernie Sanders won the presidency, which I hope he does, but if he did, that party as we know it, and a lot of the people that hold most of the power in that party, goes away.
Yeah.
It dies off.
Oh,
and that's what they're fighting.
It feels that way. They like the system. It's like you said, it's self-contained and it defends itself. So
yeah.
So
okay, you had.
Well, I was just going to say we're getting towards the end here. I wanted to give everybody an opportunity. I like to make things slightly educational. So in addition to telling us kind of what you've got going on and where people can follow you, what would you say, in addition to voting for you, people could do to explore some things in the independent way of thinking and voting in their states, jurisdictions, whatever?
I want to say two things. The first one is I'll answer this question. The second one is about my personal life. So if I forget where I'm going with this, come back to my personal life. You guys can remind me. But,
good delegation.
Yeah, there you go. The thing about it, like, I wouldn't even mind if we had these parties and they just stayed exactly like they are if the public themselves were independent. Because I think I used to be a Republican back in the day. I was born into a Republican household and everything else, and I sort of bought into all the stuff for a long time. And it was, I'm 42. It was around 2002, 3, somewhere in there, when the Patriot Act came along, and then we're attacking the wrong country and a bunch of stuff. And I'm going, whoa, what's this small government thing? I remember these small government Republicans, and I kind of bought that whole idea. And now all of a sudden, this is the opposite of small government, right? To have Patriot Act, everything else. So I bailed out. And what I realized when I did that was how much bias I really had. I was defending things that my party was doing that I never would have defended, like morally or ethically. I would have never defended it. But I was doing it because that was my team. It's like rooting for the Denver Broncos. When Chris Harris commits pass interference, we're all like, that's not pass interference. Are you kidding me? That's BS, whatever.
Absolutely.
When the other team does it, then obviously it's always, even when it's not pass interference, it is, right? So, and that's what happens is that the partisan divide, it's really clever that way, but it makes you so that you don't actually think straight. Speaking for myself, I didn't, I wasn't thinking straight. And so I had to relieve myself of that strain, of that bias, and become an independent. I've never been a Democrat. I've never belonged to any other party since the day I left the Republican Party, because I realized that it was messing with how I think. And I don't like that. I want to be able to think things through myself. I feel like we're all given this brain, and we should probably, try and use it whenever possible. Right. So that's the big thing. I want people to do that. Online is a problem because I think people perceive themselves as having an audience, and so they're unrelenting. They don't want to back off on any of their positions because they feel like they're being watched by other people that are ideologically in their camp or whatever, and that they'll lose street cred or whatever it is. And so I think that's a big part of this bubble that everybody creates over themselves. But the online thing, if we could all just once a day say, yeah, you're right, I'm wrong, like just once a day, I think that would be amazing. But ultimately, I'm not saying that what worked for me to think independently is going to work for everybody, or that it's even necessary for everybody else. But for myself, And I do believe I'm a common man. So maybe for a lot of people, I think just by registering as an independent or as a no party preference, is what it's called here in California, I think that makes you smarter. I think it probably does. And then I'll do the personal thing. But if you have a response to
No, I think that all sounds great. And in fact, it's very much core to where we are in how we present the show. You know, like I said, I have called myself a Democrat. I've never felt like one, not for the last few years. But realistically, that's the point of our show. We want people to actually think. And maybe I'd be willing to admit that maybe you're right to some regard, that if people would drop party, they could actually think clearly.
Well, they definitely got me, because I did not register. I did the same thing, actually. I was Republican. And then when I left, I was like, nope, done. And then there was well, if you want to vote in the primary, you have to be registered as a Democrat. And I was like, oh, I really want that. It was around a specific election. And then I just stayed. And I'm like, you know, now that you say that, I got to think about that.
Yeah, well, and I did in 2016. I would not have had to do that here in California, but I still didn't vote in the primary at that time because I was out of town, and I didn't have mail ballots or whatever. But I gave Bernie Sanders $250 in 2016. I figured, hey, you could get more than one vote with that, I hope.
Yeah,
right? So,
there you go.
So I felt like I was clear in that regard. But you know, the other thing and the personal thing that I wanted to bring up is that my wife, Erica, my wonderful wife, we've been married for 15 years. In just 6 days, it'll be 15 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But we've got a little girl on the way. We'd tried for a long time to have a kid, and it wasn't working out for a variety of reasons. And then we kind of gave up because of all the costs involved, the healthcare, and you know, also thinking about climate change and what kind of a future this kid's going to have, and a lot of stuff like that. And we kind of just, you know, I mean, I married her because I love her, and I was fine with being just with her. I didn't marry her as a baby maker or anything. So I was fine with just being me and her. But she ended up getting pregnant, and now we've got a little girl who will be born around Christmas time. And I got to tell you, before I really didn't think that, like, I don't buy into the concept of other people's children. I think that children are everybody's, and they're all of our responsibility, because even from a selfish point of view, they're our doctors when we're old. You know, they're people that we need around, that we need to have a functional society. Then our children actually have to be taken care of. But I always thought that was enough. But with this kid coming, it's done nothing but harden my resolve on this thing, because I really, truly, to my heart of hearts, believe the answer is not, it's not me. Like, I'm not the answer. I'm just a guy. But I think I have the answer. And if you in any society, if you live in a society and you come up with an answer for problems that people are facing, it's up to you to present it. Like, you have to. That's your job. That's how you belong to a society. And you know, so that's what I'm doing. But ultimately, the strength and the draw of an independent, you know, win and candidacy and an independently thinking government is that the people themselves, the voters who are supposed to have the power in this government, that's how they get the power back from these parties. I believe is to reject the dogma and the tail wagging the dog on all these different issues, and really just take a moment and think and look at things, you know, from a rational point of view. Try and reject the fear of immigrants and of you know, right-wing people. It's like everybody's got fears they want to push. But ultimately, we're all people, and if we could all just get together and kumbaya a little bit, I feel like we could actually make the world right. We can actually fix it. But we have to be strong enough to stand up to all these powers that are trying to keep us from doing that. And that's the hard part, you know. But I'm going to keep fighting because it's worth it, and that's really the bottom line.
Thank you.
If anybody wants to come to my website, it's voteforcox.com, spelled just like you think, except it's COX, in case you think that's not how that's spelled. I've got a lot of policy stuff on there. I'm a total nerd. I've got 30,000 words. I wrote it all myself, sourced it all myself. I built the site myself. I set up the lights for my own photos myself. I'm that's the kind of person I am, but I just really want people to start to just take a moment, turn off MSNBC, turn off Fox News, turn off whatever talking head is trying to tell you what to think, and think for yourself. Because once we can do that, we can actually fix this, I think.
Thanks. I agree.
We really appreciate it. And we'd love to have you back in the future. Maybe we'll have some other things that come up and we can chat some more.
Yeah, it'd be great.
I really love the one that I listened to, and that's why I knew that this was the right show. I was totally going to come on. So
yay!
We appreciate it.
Offered, I was like, yes, I will definitely come on the show.
And we appreciate what you're doing. So thank you very much. And with that great conversation, we're going to wrap up the show. Thanks for listening. If you have ideas, feedback, thoughts, please find us on social media. We are BiCurean on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or you can give us a call at 720-507-7309. And of course, you can always email us at podcast@BiCurean.com.
And if you like what we are doing, we have a new listener support program. Consider going to glow.fm/BiCurean to support our show and help us get the word out. Thank you.
Thank you.